Um, Thank you very much, Roger. I must say that it's difficult for me to consider what it is I'm supposed to say to you after the really eloquent, articulate presentation that Roger has made about the importance of the activities of this group and the members who belong to it in terms of keeping alive the faith and raising money too, because that's one of the things you mentioned, Roger, to support the things that Americans believe are important in the Middle East. And I've been sitting at the table trying to think how to formulate what I want to say to you tonight, recognizing that the dinner is over, the dinner was good, and people are now considering other things they're going to do with their evening, and how in the world they finish it up getting this guy out of the way. So I want to make a few comments which I trust you will accept in the manner in which they are intended. I am an American citizen. I was born in this country of immigrant parents who came from Tsarist Russia and who made their way in this country the way so many other people have done over the years, making a reasonable success of a reasonable life in a country which encourages and rewards those people who work relatively hard and stick to the program. Sticking to the program is tough. In the United States of America today, you have people like me. Look, I realize you've just eaten, but I'm a Republican. You need to know that. I have always been a Republican until very recently when I became a Democrat. I cannot tell you how much your reaction moves me. It was very much like the reaction of my mother-in-law who said, you know, having a little love. Because I'm very concerned about the course of our country today as a result of September the 11th, 2001. My nation appears to be embarked on an accelerated course which has been in process for a long time, of failing to understand, failing to comprehend, failing to be interested in the situation in the Middle East in terms of the perspectives of the people who either live there or who are interested in it. And this is a source of great distress to me because I have served my nation in uniform and as a diplomat, and I feel very strongly that I am a patriot. I have how many of you have been in the American military? Okay, well, you'll understand when I say this. I was a paratrooper 2.5 years before the discovery of the parachute. When we were a lot tougher than the kinds of guys that got doing this now. And I have been a diplomat largely in the Middle East, which is my area of relative expertise, for many years, going through wars and riots and coups, and people have attacked the building that I lived in with my family, and they've attacked the building that I worked in. Twice my family was evacuated for security reasons. Twice my family was separated for health reasons. We've gone through life-threatening diseases. And ladies, gentlemen, I do not take a back seat to anyone in terms of patriotism. We are living in the greatest nation that ever was. This may be the greatest nation that ever will be, but that is not a universally shared perception. A lot of people in this world do not see the United States of America as the bringer of peace, justice, freedom, truth, human rights, and international law, which is how we perceive ourselves. And I must tell you that the years I spent in the diplomatic service and in the years since, I have convinced myself, which is not quite the same thing as being right, you understand? But I have convinced myself that the key thing in the world, in terms of interpersonal relations, international relations, is perception. The only thing that matters in relations between people and nations is perception. Because perception is reality. And what you see as being correct may be seen as somebody else as being wrong. And in this country, I was speaking briefly with some of the consuls general and honorary consuls who are here, and who recognize, I think even better than those of us who are Americans, that the United States as a nation is about as isolated as a nation can get. We as Americans, if we do not have a racial, religious, ethnic, or family relationship with some other part of the world, we don't know where it is, and we don't care. Now, in this room tonight are people who are interested in, for whatever reason, the Middle East, the cradle of civilization. And the United States as a nation is aware of the fact that there is a Middle East, even if individuals in the United States are not quite certain where it is. I have to digress for just a moment. I have a very active sense of humor. You'll forgive me for this, I hope, because it was a dreadful burden to drag through a career in the diplomatic service. But there is a story that's going around about the journalist who went into the United Nations Delegates Lounge to ask a question. And the question was, excuse me, what is your honest opinion about the meat shortage in the rest of the world? And the Israeli representative said, what do you mean, excuse me? And the Nigerian representative said, what do you mean, honest? The Iraqi said, what do you mean, opinion? The Ethiopian said, what do you mean, meat? The Swede said, I don't understand shortage. And the American said, what do you mean, the rest of the world? Now, this is an effort to put a very serious point in a slightly humorous context, because the United Nations, pardon me, the United States, there is a difference. Well, I guess, yeah, there is a difference. The United States is filled with people who do not really know that there's a world out there, and are not very interested in it. Now, I made this comment, I mentioned this to some people here tonight. I was up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin the other day, and I made this comment to a World Affairs Council. And one of the people said, I find that very offensive. You are speaking to a World Affairs Council. And I said, I know that. And 260 miles north of here is a country called Canada. Our major trading partner. We are theirs, they are ours. Raise your hand if you know the name of the person who heads that country. A very embarrassed silence. Nobody knew, and the point, and I've said this to the Egyptian Consul General here tonight, who has served in Canada, where, as you may be aware, a number of people speak English. Yeah. And I said, the point is, you see, that for Americans, who cares who is the Prime Minister of Canada? It's not important to us. Now, for the Canadians, the President of the United States is very important, but the reverse is not true. And when you take Canada, one of two countries with which our nation has a frontier, and you shift the focus to the Middle East, and most people in America are not quite sure where that is, except it's in the Middle East somewhere. They know nothing about the history, they know nothing about the geography, they know nothing about the people, except what they read in the American media. And ladies and gentlemen, the American media hardly ever gives a straight story on that situation. You are facing, in your efforts to work with an organization like OMEN, an organization dedicated to doing good works for people who need good works, an organization which merits your support and the support of people as well. It is so extraordinarily difficult to get this nation focused on the issues, which is why it is dangerous for us as Americans to let the situation persist without an effort to correct it, recognizing that it's not easy, it's not short, and it may not even be successful, but my goodness, it's worth It's worth the try. I served in the Middle East for a number of years, and my nation trained me. They spent a lot of time and money, and I spent a great deal of effort in learning to be able to communicate with and live among people in the Middle East and North Africa for the express purpose of being able to tell my government how the people in that part of the world view things. But in many cases, my government does not wish to know. You've had similar experiences in your own homes, in your own businesses, in your own social life, where we don't want to hear this bad news. It's a very difficult and dangerous and sometimes almost impossible task to try to convey to the American government, or any other government, let's be honest, what it is that they don't wish to know but need to. So I have become, with some success, a moving foxhole, which tends to attract the eye. As I go around the nation trying to tell people what the real situation is in the Middle East, as I see it, they don't want to hear this, they don't like it, and those of you who have made similar efforts, I'm quite sure, are as familiar as I am with the costs of trying to convey that kind of information, because it ain't easy and ain't welcome, and it is expensive in many, many ways, but it's worth it. It's worth it. In the speeches I made, a couple of press conferences I made here since I've been in San Francisco as a guest of OMAN, trying to convey to people that unless the United States government, unless the United States people are able to understand that until there is a rational, reasonable solution to the Israeli-Palestinian problem, there will be no peace in the Middle East. And this is awfully difficult to explain to people, especially people who are not deeply immersed in or well informed on the situation, to understand exactly what it is I'm talking about. Now, let me tell you here tonight, so you know, that I'm Jewish. I said earlier today that I am the poor man's Madeleine Albright because I only recently found this out. Okay, right. You may remember what Madeleine Albright said when she found out. She said, "Oy vey." Okay. I found out just a little over a year and a half ago when I was in Tokyo, where my father was Jewish. I knew this, and never had any question about that. But mother said, no, I'm not Jewish. And as you may know, this is a matrilineal thing. But in Tokyo, in the home of my oldest boy, we went to the Ellis Island website, and we discovered that, yes, mother was Jewish. So I am Jewish. Now, this discovery has downgraded my situation from being an anti-Semite to being a self-hating Jew. By the way, do you know what an anti-Semite is? Listen to this phrase. I just saw this in the internet the other day. It used to be that an anti-Semite was someone who hated Jews. Today, an anti-Semite is someone that Jews hate. And this is a very compelling and very accurate statement. It is, I do not wish anything bad to happen to a single Israeli, and bad things have happened. For the same reason, I do not want a bad thing to happen to a single Palestinian. I think worse things have happened. But above all, I do not want bad things to happen to Americans. And bad things have happened, and I fear that there are going to be more. Take Iraq, please. We have gone into Iraq as an invader. No. We went as a liberator. What's the difference between a liberator and an invader? It depends who you ask. We've gone into Iraq, a Muslim country of Christians, an Arab country of Christians and Muslims, which we had no right to take over, No one has given the United States the right to decide who rules Iraq. That is not our charter. That is not our mandate. We have no right to do that, but nobody can stop us. We, as Americans, can do whatever we please anywhere in the world without the slightest concern for anybody being able to stop us. But there are people who will look around for ways to make us sorry we did it all over the world. And although I hope from the depths of my soul that I am wrong, and I will pray to any God that you put forward that I am wrong, I fear that we will pay a terrible price for this for a long time in many places and in many different ways. Because there are an awful lot of folks out there who do not like what we have done and are doing, and they will try to find a way to make us pay. It doesn't mean we're wrong. Don't misunderstand me. But their perception is that we are. I used the word perception. I have to digress for just a moment. Think about what perception means. Perception is reality. All of you, every one of you, every one of us, does whatever we do in our lives on the basis of a perception of what is the right thing to do. And without knowing for sure that it is, but our perception is the right thing to do, and without wishing to waste this moment that I have with you in too much humor, think about perception. Perception is how you choose a car color. Perception is how you select a hairstyle. Perception is how you choose a necktie. Perception is how you select a spouse. And somebody else comes along and says, good heavens, where did you get that necktie? Or spouse. You see, because their perception may be different than yours. It doesn't make them right and you wrong. It merely means that they don't see things the same way that you do. And when it comes to the Middle East, we are in that kind of a problem right up to the earlobes. Because the American people, for whatever reason, do not see the situation in the Middle East the way it is seen by almost everybody else in the world. And this is dangerous. Not only is it dangerous, but it violates everything that we say our nation stands for. Human rights, international law, peace, development, all these wonderful precepts on which our nation is based go right out the window when we turn our attention to the Middle East, where we do not really care what happens to the Palestinians. We do not really care what has happened to the Iraqis. And the American media, no offense to anybody in this room who is with the American media, I hope I'm not speaking too fast for you. The American media will not, does not, seems incapable of telling the American people what the real situation is, what the real problems are, and what the real dangers consist in. And I find this terribly depressing because our nation, our people, are open-minded, good-hearted, friendly. All of the things that we see for ourselves, all of the things that we believe we are, in the perception of the rest of the world, are not applied to the Middle East. And I think that this is going to cost us a great deal. I fear, that's the word, that this is going to cost us a great deal. Think about this. Suppose tomorrow, every nation in the Middle East had a perfectly open, free, correct, democratic election. How many governments would turn out to be pro-American? None, zero, zip. So you really want democracy? Yes, the people have to have democracy because without democracy they're frustrated and bad things happen everywhere except Palestine, where there is not any even talking about having true democracy, because democracy is based upon freedom, of which the Palestinians have none, and the opportunity to move freely about the country, of which the Palestinians have none. And all of this is made possible by us. Not us, but us in the larger sense. And it distresses the dickens out of me. Ah, that's not phrased strongly enough. It really, what's the French expression? It really pisses me off that I am unable to get my views in the same way that you are unable to get your views into the American media. We are so savagely, so incredibly outgunned and overwhelmed by the people on the other side of these issues that it's almost enough, but not quite enough, to make you despair and say, well, the hell with it, I won't even try. Yes, you will. And yes, you should. And is it important? You bet. And is it meaningful? Absolutely. For all of the reasons that you can think of, in which I have no requirement whatsoever to articulate for you. When I was invited to come out here to speak for OMEN, I was terribly impressed. And when I heard Roger tonight talking about one of the issues that sometimes is difficult to bring up, that this requires money. There are very few things in life that you can do without money, especially if they're humanitarian, especially if they're designed to better and advance the interests of human people. And I thought that his presentation on the importance of the envelopes on your table and the importance of the work that OMEN does and the contributions made by the people who are honored here tonight is so terribly significant, especially when it is done in the face of overwhelming resistance by significant proportions of our nation's population, which makes the work at the same time just as difficult as it is significant. The video we saw here, I don't know how many of you have ever seen, but many of you may know about the video from a program called 60 Minutes, done in 1996, in which the American ambassador to the United Nations, in response to a question about whether or not the death of 500,000 Iraqi children as the result of the embargo, and the American ambassador to the United Nations said, and I quote, "I think this is a very hard choice, but the price, we think the price is worth it." If you've never seen this, and I show it quite often when I do my lectures, it is the coldest thing you've ever seen in your life. 500,000 children. It's worth it. When you add that kind of mentality, or lack of mentality, when you add that kind of calloused disregard for the value of human life to what we have facilitated and permitted in Palestine for the last 37 years, or perhaps more, it is not easy, it is not difficult. In fact, it is easy to understand why a lot of people don't like our policies. They don't hate us any more than we hate the Iraqis who died in our recent invasion. Our discontent was with the policies of the government, but you can't attack a policy, so you attack people. And Iraqis died before, and the Iraqis died in the attack. And anyone in this nation who believes that the horror of September the 11th took place because we have freedoms is suffering from a severe illusion. Can you imagine that anybody is prepared to kill and die because America has freedoms? Or because Britney Spears has a belly button? They are prepared to kill and die because of what we have been doing in Iraq for 12 years, and facilitating what is being done in Palestine for the last 37, and they do not like it. This doesn't make them right. This does not make us wrong. It's merely a question of perception. Well, it depends how you look at it. You don't want to raise these kinds of questions, and it depends where you do it. But there are an awful lot of people in this world who do not think that the principles for which we stand are being implemented in the Middle East with our help, and in fact they see it just the other way. This doesn't mean that we're wrong, but it should raise considerations as to whether or not their perceptions of our policy have an impact on us, and they do, and they will. So I'm supposed to, Roger said to take some questions tonight, and I want to do that. And I've been brooding over exactly how to articulate this presentation which leads up to the questions, because I do this for a living in a sense. I go around and I talk to people trying to raise the level of understanding and education in a nation which for the most part isn't really certain where the Middle East is or what Palestinians are. We have a country of a 200 and X billion, a million people. They're all intelligent, they're all reasonably educated, they're all reasonably well fed, they're all reasonably articulate, but they know nothing about the world. And they know a hell of a lot less about the Middle East because the media gives it to them in a twisted, all bent out of shape manner. Think of this. Saddam Hussein was not anywhere near as popular as he liked to think he was, or as his minions told him he was. By the same token, Saddam Hussein was not anywhere near as unpopular as we like to think he was, as it was all hyped up. And I come up with a way to explain why this could be true. On the 10th of September 2001, the President of the United States, George Bush, had a popularity rating of 52%. 36 hours later, it was at 94%. What had happened? The nation was under attack, rally behind the leader. And many people in this country who do not think very much of President Bush or his policies rallied behind him because he's leading the nation against the enemy. And you don't think that this happened in Iraq? Where for 12 years, Saddam Hussein stood up in the face of the aggression of the United States of America. A lot of people who didn't like the guy at all supported him in his efforts to fend off incursions of the United States of America. And now he is history in one way or another, and the Iraqi people, or what's left of them, are faced with rebuilding a nation which we have savaged for 12 years. And this wonderful expose on the olive groves didn't talk about the houses, didn't talk about the villages, just talked about trees. Look what we've done out there, not directly, but making it all possible. Nobody in the entire world, as far as I'm aware, ever condemned the United States for any Iraqi who suffered at the hands of Saddam Hussein. That was not viewed as our responsibility. And if Saddam Hussein mistreated Iraqis, that was not considered something for which we had to pay a price. Not true today, because now we are doing it to the Iraqi people. And that is our responsibility, and that is our fault, and it is something that we are definitely engaged in. And if you add to that what has been happening to the Palestinians with our money and our arms and our protection. By the way, how many of you in this room because they don't want you to know. This was a UN Security Council resolution, 13 in favor, 2 abstentions, 1 opposed, condemning Israel for the death of United Nations workers in the occupied territories. We said no. Now, the rest of the world notices this, even if the United States doesn't, and it's put on our tab. I've served my nation, to the best of my limited abilities for a long period of time, and I do not want anything bad to happen to a single American. But I'm very much afraid that bad things will happen for a long period of time in many different ways and in many different places. And I regret that deeply. And I wish there was some way to correct it. And if there is some way to correct it, it takes a great deal of time, a great deal of effort, a great deal of dedication, and some money. And all of those things are available from the group here. And I hope you will stand with that program. And I'm ready to take your questions. Roger has pointed out that some of you may have to go somewhere else tonight. Please feel free to leave, remembering that we are taking names. Yes, sir, please.
There are some people in this country, including myself, who believe that the war in Iraq was, for the most part, as a result of the expanded undue influence of Condoleezza Rice and some of her cohorts, the so-called moralists in the White House, Wolfowitz and Armitage and others who had decided the United States should have its way. Now, Ms. Condoleezza Rice in September 2002 wrote an article. She put this article as a national security strategy, which she released through her office, in which she asserts, and I'm not going to read except a couple of phrases here, there is, quote, a single suitable model for national success, end of quote, hyphen, Americas. That is right and true for every person in every society. It hails the unprecedented power of the United States and goes on to have changed her views from when she was at Stanford. She was considered for détente and so forth in the first administration of Bush, his father. Now she joined the moralists, and she was for using power for preventive action. And as far as she is concerned, it's okay to do that because America is good and everybody else is no good. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm glad you wound up with a question there. I was afraid you were going to leave me with facing the whole thing. Yes.
No. I'm really angry about this.
I would never have guessed. Yeah, thank you, sir. No, I'm not sure that Condoleezza Rice has either the intellectual or political stature to have carried us to where the nation is. I would commend to those of you who have access to the internet something called newamericancentury.org. You know about this? Now, if you don't know about the phrase, you know about the policy. The policy was written in the 90s, and it said, essentially, with the demise of the Soviet Union, the United States now has a chance to run the world the way we want. And one of the things that you do is to ensure that any country that threatens us politically, economically, culturally, socially, or musically, I guess, is prevented from doing this by, if necessary, a preventive strike, which is now an articulated U.S. government policy. If we see the potential of a possibility of maybe eventually a challenge, we're going to get you first. And you start where? In Iraq, to guarantee the flow of oil, Israel's security, and then you set out to change the governments in the rest of that part of the world. And this is all written up before 9/11, but that's what made it all possible in terms of implementation. So Condoleezza Rice, who is clearly no dummy, I think has hitched her wagon in this particular case to the people who are pushing the program, because that's the way her success is going to lie as the National Security Advisor. But it is the people who wrote that policy back in the 1990s, Mr. Kristol, Mr. Wolfowitz, Mr. Cheney, Mr. Rumsfeld, Mr. Fife, Mr. Elliott Abrams, and all of these guys who now have important positions in the government. And they're the ones implementing this policy because they can, now that the United States as a people are frightened. Yeah, her article, but see, I think she's a follower. Yes, but I think that I don't know, I think she's more of a follower than a leader. I think Mr. Wolfowitz and Mr. Pearl, no, I don't want to say that, never mind. I think that those individuals are the ones who've articulated the policy to which she has attached herself. Let's be honest. No, let's not go that far. In any organization, one of the ways you get ahead is to say, boss, what a fabulous idea. Sheer genius. rather than saying, "What are you smoking, Chief?" That is not the way you get ahead. And that's one of the reasons why I'm no longer in the diplomatic service.
Okay, thank you. Based on your insight and your understanding of the history of Iraq, what do you think would be the best for the people form of government that would meet their needs as you understand it? And secondly, what do you anticipate what's going to happen?
Well, let's take the second part first, because in my business, just like yours, trying to predict the future is a pretty shaky business. You know, especially if you're going to be in the stock market or go out to that fabulous casino. Where was that, John? Vacaville? It was a fabulous casino. I was really very impressed with this Indian casino out there, where the people go in to measure this very thesis that you're pushing forward. You know, what's going to happen? Look, when I was in Baghdad, I was a diplomat there, and a telegram would come from Washington saying, this event has taken place. Tell us now, what is Saddam Hussein going to do? Well, it's possible he was going to do this or this or this or this or that or that or that or that or that and this and that, or all of the above or none of the above. And it was entirely possible that at that precise moment, Saddam Hussein himself didn't know what he was going to do. Nonetheless, I'm required to tell Washington, which is why you find diplomats engaging in what I call dynamic equivocation. Okay? There's a very good chance of the possibility that Saddam Hussein may do this, or maybe not. What do the Iraqis need? All right, they need democracy. I was down in Florida. I have to tell you this story because it was a great moment for me. I was down in Florida 10 days ago, speaking to 600 retirees in Sarasota. And somebody put up their hand and said, how long will it take for democracy to be firmly rooted and established in Afghanistan? I had one of these epiphany experiences. And I said, okay, all of you are retired, which means you're educated, you've made a lot of money enough to retire down here in Florida. You're all interested in international relations, you hear. How many of you are comfortable using a cell phone? You know, 16 hands went up. Okay. I said, look, cell phone. Cell phone is a piece of hardware. And it comes with an instruction book. And it tells you precisely how to use it. You, I said to the group, you will do it this way, whereas your kids will do it that way, you know. But the reason you're not comfortable using a cell phone is because you're not used to it. Now, let's talk about democracy, which is not a piece of hardware, which does not come with an instruction book. It's psychological, it's historical, it's cultural, it's philosophical. How long will it take to have democracy in Afghanistan? Weeks. Weeks, maybe longer. You have no idea what you're talking about in a place like that. Now, Iraq is not Afghanistan. I understand that. But we've already seen what happens when you pull the cork out of a tightly bottled country. Some of you are too young to remember, but our nation backed some of the biggest dirt bags the world has ever seen all over the world when we perceived it to be in our national interest. Dictators, savage, nasty, miserable dictators, because we perceived it to be in our best advantage. And Saddam Hussein, however vile he was, served our interests by bottling Iraq into a country. And now you've pulled the cork, and you have the Shia and the Sunni and the Barzani Kurds and the Talibani Kurds and the Yazidis and the Sabaeans and the Turkmen and the Chaldeans and all of these people now, and you're going to let them be democratic, turning them all loose. Good luck. Drop me a card. Because they're not ready for this. In Northern Virginia, Oliver North, remember who Oliver North was? Okay, Oliver North was a guy I worked with when I was on the Vice President's Task Force on Terrorism. He was our National Security Council point of contact. I got to know this guy. He is a bright, capable man who perhaps, but He's the sort of person you'd like to have on your staff as long as you can watch him. I've said this to him. Oliver North ran for the Senate in Northern Virginia. Ladies, gentlemen, his supporters marched with pitchforks and torches. And he lost. And his supporters said, damn. Got to wait 6 years. Now you got a democracy. In many parts of the world, if his side wins, we know how to take care of that. Very quickly. We have unleashed, we have uncorked the bottle, we have opened Pandora's box, we've let the genie out of the, whatever you want to use as a phrase. Iraq isn't ready for what we're going to ask them to do, is to set up a government. Some years ago, I was on television, a program called Crossfire, with one of the individuals, the Italians would call him an assole, basically is the pronunciation. Who said, we're going to take the Iraq National Congress, the finest opposition group that money can buy, and we're going to put them in Iraq and have them impose democracy. I said, what are you talking about? An imposed democracy, you twit, is a dictatorship. Democracy goes this way, not that way. You cannot impose democracy. But America's going to do it, by God. Yes, we support democracy. Hey, I fear for the Iraqis, because having said for the last 12 years that we are committed unshakably to the territorial integrity of Iraq, we're now talking about 3 separate regions, which is what colonialism is all about. And that's how Kuwait came to be when the Brits drew a line in the sand and said, hey, that's Iraq, this is Kuwait. And that's what we're talking about now, because the pro-Israeli lobby, which pushes all of this, does not want a strong, powerful Iraq. And that's one of the ways you get it, is to slice it up so they can't do it. But democracy is such a tough thing, such a difficult thing. Even right here in San Francisco, where everybody supports the governor, or the mayor, or the city council, or whatever it is, but you buckle down and you say, well, we got to wait till the next election to change this. And you don't do that in other parts of the world. So if we as Americans think that we know how they should organize their affairs, I think you have to turn the equation around and say, would we be happy if they were to come in and tell us that they know how to organize our affairs? And the answer is, I don't think so. Because the perception is that we're there as a conqueror, as an occupier, and if I were advising Mr. Rumsfeld, and he hasn't called in hours, I would say, Donnie, Bubala, do not be photographed sitting in Saddam's palace stretched out on one of his couches. I mean, that is not smart, you dunce. Now you become the new Saddam Hussein. Well, maybe he's happy about that, you see. But me as an American, I am not. And I forgot what your question was, but boy, am I having fun. I'm sorry. I don't, we're not going to be able to tell those people how to run their country any more than you can go across the street tomorrow and tell your neighbors how they're raising their kids wrong. They're not going to welcome that input. Before I get to you, sir, just one question. Look, let me try to explain what it's like being an American diplomat. China, you've heard of China. Last July, whenever it was, President Bush went to China. On his way over, he stopped in Honolulu and in Tokyo, and he told the world, I'm going to tell the Chinese government that they've got to stop selling arms and missile components to Pakistan. Hey, it's bad enough if you go across the street and tell your neighbors how they're raising their kids wrong. But it's worse if you stop on the way over and tell the other neighbors how these people are raising their kids wrong, okay? You're not welcome after the 30th or 40th visit. So let me ask you a question. Think now. Why would China, what's the one word which explains why China would want to sell weapons and missile components to Pakistan? Money is too easy. India. India's got 1.5 billion people. They've already had 3 wars across this border that's ill-defined. And there's a potential threat there. And who is India's enemy? Pakistan. So China says, hey, George, Bubala, it's in our interests to keep Pakistan strong. Now they listen very politely because he does have the superpower of the world, the hyperpower. But I'm quite certain that as he was walking out of the room, they saluted his departing back with gestures learned from their Sicilian grandmothers. It's very hard for the Chinese to do, you see. We know what's best for us. How the hell do you get in here? Now, back to Iraq. We know it precisely how they should run their affairs. And that is totally meaningless in the context of what Iraq is all about. I only lived there for 2.5 years, and I'm not an Iraqi, I'm a foreigner. I did my best to understand and watch how this all worked. They're going to have a hard time sorting it out because they have all these different groups. I have to tell you, you'll forgive me now, people sometimes ask me because they're even more ignorant, can you please explain to us the basic difference between Shiite Islam and Sunni Islam? I love this question with an totally American Protestant audience. I say, yes, that's very easy. It's precisely the same difference as between Lutherans and Episcopalians. I said, and that'll shut you all up because you don't know what that difference is. Okay, yes, sir. I'm sorry.
I was curious to get this laughter out of my system.
I'm sorry. All right, that's it.
One of the things that we hear a lot about is whether or not the tail is wagging the dog. As in Israeli foreign policy is now becoming American foreign policy. And I'm curious from your perspective and your knowledge of the State Department, despite the Richard Perles and the Wormsers and the Wolfowitzes and so forth, the Israel firsters who seem to now be controlling American foreign policy, is there some concern within the State Department that we are having our foreign policy written in Tel Aviv rather than in Washington?
A tough question. If you remember that the job of the State Department and the people in it is not to formulate foreign policy, but to implement it. We make an input, we tell them what we think but the decisions as to what you're going to do are made at the White House or in the Congress. And it is not the government of Israel that decides what we should do in the Middle East. It's the American people, a vast majority of which are either committed to Israel's security and development or at least don't understand why that could be a problem. I was quite interested in the fact that in the last 2 years, only 3 Foreign Service officers resigned in protest over our policy. But if you know anything about the workings of a large organization, the fact that 3 people resigned publicly indicates that there are many hundreds of others who are uncomfortable but haven't resigned because they want to stay in to try to make their contribution into having the policy shifted. We have a democracy, and in a democracy, ladies and gentlemen, you know this, the tyranny of the minority is what counts. If in Oman, 6 members of the board decide that this is what we should do, and the other members of the board don't care that much, that's what you're going to do. Which is why we do not have relations with Cuba. 90% of the American people say, of course we should have relations with Cuba. 10% of the people say no. And they care. And the rest of us don't. So they have their way. In the case of Middle East policy, the pro-Israeli lobby, which consists of, Christians, Jews, whatever, the pro-Israeli lobby really cares, and they're organized and they're functional, and they get their way because the rest of the people who may feel uneasy and uncomfortable don't care that much, and don't give the money, and don't join in the demonstrations, and don't vote out that congressman. This is tricky stuff. John Usher, who is sitting here at the table, is involved with an organization in the United States called the Council for the National Interest. And the Council for the National Interest has spent some years trying to get people to focus on the fact that the interests of the United States are not necessarily inextricably intertwined with the interests of any other country, of which Israel is one. That's a very difficult task. because the people who care, and they win the day because they do it. They've had 40 years to do it. The media's with them. Every movie you've seen in the last X years, the bad guys are the Arabs. Even the comedies have the bad guys as the Arabs. And boy, so the average American says, "Oh, whoa, this is really scary business." These folks. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Well, then as a follow-up, if that's the case, then do we need to question the loyalties of the people who are writing policy for Israel and are now in the U.S. government?
Well, absolutely, you have to question their loyalty in the same way that they question mine. They say, "Hey, wait a minute, you're not agreeing with what the president says." Hey, well, the president works for me. I don't work for him. But in time, I was on a show called Donahue, which is now canceled. I was on with I was on with Susan Sarandon and Tim Robbins. Nobody really noticed me. Okay, I was there, but somebody criticized Robbins for not supporting the president. He says, "Wait a minute, we tell the president what to do. He doesn't tell us what to do. This is a democracy." And someone said, "He is your commander-in-chief," and Robbins said, "No, he isn't. He's commander-in-chief of the armed forces, not the commander-in-chief of the American people. He works for us. That's why we're no longer a British colony. He's not the king." So questioning the loyalty of people is tough because the ones who are supporting Israel believe that they're doing this in the best interest of the United States. I think they're wrong, but they're not being traitors or disloyal, although they will accuse me of the same thing because I don't support our current policy. It's all perception. It's all perception, and that controls everything. Yes, sir.
I want to switch to Bush's roadmap. Is it gonna anywhere with it, or is it at the end?
The roadmap. If you've read the details that have come out of the press, I think that it is unfair to suggest that the roadmap was written by Mr. Sharon, but I think he had the editor's pencil. And this reflects the question that you raised. In the United States of America today, we all know that the Israelis are the good guys, the Palestinians are the bad guys. And it pervades every aspect of our society and every aspect of our formulation of policy and consideration of policy. However true it is, it's got nothing to do with it, that's what the people perceive. And the roadmap as written, I don't know how many of you read the Washington Compost. That's the paper I get at home. The Washington Compost had an article on the front page 2 days ago, I forget when it was, entitled Analysis. And it says, George Bush, President Bush, has no reason in the world to push the roadmap because the people who do not think that the Palestinians deserve a state are the ones who vote. He doesn't get any more votes from them by doing what they're already supporting, but he loses a lot of votes if he goes the other way. And this is how democracy works. It's a flawed system because the people in it, except for us, are flawed. And you go where the votes are. What's the #1 objective of any elected leader in the world? To get reelected. How do you do that? You don't push for an independent, free Palestine. In the country today, until the time comes that enough people are prepared to speak in favor of that, that you recognize it. Oh, now that you've explained it to me, I certainly want to go along with you. There was, some of you are too young to remember Pogo, the greatest political cartoon of all time, done by a fellow named Walt Kelly, who died at an early age. In the Pogo cartoon, which was a political commentary, there was a politician named Deacon Mushrat. And he had a sign on his wall that I saw when I think I was in high school. And it said, "Hark, there go the people, and I must follow them, for I am their leader." That's what democracy is all about. You tell them what they want, and they will do it. And if not enough people tell them that, they won't. Democracy is a flawed system. It's made up of people. Yes, sir.
Mr. Peck, thank you so much for.
I have one more question after this. Yes, or two more. I'll have two more, yeah.
There's an argument out there, which I don't agree with, but it's an argument out there anyway, that states that the Middle East has lived under dictatorship. Most of the Middle East countries have lived under dictatorship, and what happened in Iran could be a new wave stirring things up, and make things change. Maybe I think to the worst, but the argument goes that it might actually improve. What's your thoughts on that, and what's the counter argument to that kind of dangerous argument? Thank you.
Well, you see this written up in scholarly journals by people who are theoretically educated and intelligent, and they say there is no possibility of the countries in the Middle East developing unless the people are given a chance to see that they have a voice in the government and they can control their environment. This, of course, does not apply to the Palestinians. You understand? But, if this is true, it's important to consider the possibility that one of the reasons that those governments are kind of oppressive is that they do not want the people to express their views, which are opposed to the policies followed by that government of maintaining good relations with the United States, which is responsible for the suppression of the Palestinian people. And Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, we were talking about this, he's a man with whom I've worked, and I remember him better than he remembers me, Your Excellency, but I have a great deal of respect for him. Hosni Mubarak cannot afford to let the country turn loose because the people out there do not like the policies. How many governments in the Middle East would be pro-American if they had democratic elections tomorrow? Zero. So suppose you had, oh, he's gone, where'd you go? There you are, yes, I'm sorry, sir, I lost track of him. No, you were sitting there before. No, if the Iraqis have a fundamentalist Shiite government elected, are we going to stand for that? Because we want democracy as long as it comes out the way we want, and that is not democracy, folks. We told the Palestinians, you can have free elections and elect anybody you want, except him. That's not democracy. Yes, sir.
Yes, before the war started, before they invaded Iraq, they were talking about Islamic banks. Iraq they have their own government. Then Sharon suggested that Jay Garner be better. And Jay Garner was in charge of that back in 1965. I don't know.
Well, there's an organization to which Mr. Garner believes called JINSA. You know what JINSA? The Jewish International Security Agency. Well, if you don't know about this, folks, I can't help you. It's an organization which exists for the purpose of ensuring that the United States never turns its back on Israel's military needs. And every year they take all these military officers to Israel for a familiarization course. And Garner is one of these guys. And he also spent a fair bit of time working up in Kurdistan, so that he has those people at least on his side. If somebody wishes to suggest that much of America's Middle East policy is driven by and controlled by people who are strongly pro-Israeli, I don't see any reason in the world to argue with it, because I think that's the case. And in my business, my own personal career, I've had sufficient exposure to the costs of standing up and challenging this idea, or at least talking about it. Because it's neither easy nor is it necessarily very successful, however significant it may be. Let me put it to you this way, and I said it already this evening, I think. I'll begin to lose track of what I said to whom. The security of the United States is not inextricably linked to the survival of the State of Israel. But I think that for our role in the world and for the benefit of the American people writ large, some form of a secure Israel living in peace and security among her neighbors would be a good thing. But I do not think that you can get to peace and security the way you're going at it now, Israel, because that is not going to work, as history shows us immutably, without any equivocation. What we have done in Iraq is a violation of everything we stood for. How in the world was it that we didn't speak to Iraq on any subject at any level anywhere for 12 years, while pushing the Israelis and the Palestinians addition, we've now gone in and overthrown the government at the cost of human life and facilities and the rest of it. My nation was one that told Iraq that they could not import pencils because pencils have graphite, which could be used to make nuclear weapons. And Jordan, bless them, our friends the Jordanians, in 1994, said the Arabic equivalent of, oh, the hell with it, and let Iraq import $2 million worth of pencils for their schools. This is shameful and totally unknown in this country, just like the embargo and all its other effects, because the media doesn't touch it. If you, as an American citizen, have failed to convey to your elected representatives your views on all these ranges of issues, then you have failed your duties as a citizen, because this is a democracy, and those people are supposed to do what we want. And the only way they find out is when you tell them again, and make it pointed. And Madam, okay, go ahead. I'm going to take the last one. All right, yes, ma'am, please.
I was just curious if you could expand a little bit upon what you said before about how you thought the security of Israel was such an integral factor in the stability of the United States and the region in general. Could you elaborate upon that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. You see, this is a democracy, or what passes for it, and a very significant proportion of the people in this country believe that a safe and secure Israel is an important thing, for whatever reason. I can agree with that, not at the cost of what we're doing, you understand? I don't agree with that aspect of it, but I can envision a situation which would replicate, to a degree, what the relationships were between the Arabs and the Jews and the Christians for centuries in most of the world, where they all lived in relative peace and harmony together. It's when it becomes a struggle over the land that you have problems. If you don't believe me, get up early tomorrow morning and move the fence into your neighbor's yard. And watch how she reacts. Hey, that's mine. So, you get problems this way. So I don't want any bad things for the Jewish people. I think that they got off on the wrong foot, and we've been involved in this. But I think that for the American people, there's an awful lot of us who think that a safe and secure Israel, not dominating, savaging, and suppressing the Palestinians in their own land, but a safe and secure Israel in an area which both sides agree is a reasonable area, is a good thing for us and for them and for everybody else as well. Only if it's worked out to the satisfaction of all parties involved, and I am not, as I hope I've made clear tonight, a supporter of an imperial Israel any more than I'm a supporter of an imperial United States, both of which exist today. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.